David Talbot, GVY, here at our studios, speaking with Congressman Jeff Denham. Of course, he's a representative of the Valley. Congressman, thanks for joining us here.
You got it. Thanks for having me again.
All right, the Trump infrastructure plan, I know it's going to be heading your way pretty soon. What can the Valley expect out of it?
Quite a bit, actually. We've got to do much more with what we have from a federal perspective, bringing in more federal dollars to match with a lot of the state and local dollars that we have set aside. So right now, our Highway Trust Fund, both federal with our gas tax here locally, can be combined to work on a variety of different projects, including expanding Highway 99.
Yeah, a lot of people want that. You know, it's always been designated as the world's deadliest highway or America's deadliest highway. You know, how does that actually work? You know, are you going to help advocate for Highway 99 with the other Valley delegation?
Yeah, absolutely. But this infrastructure plan goes well beyond just expanding our highways. Expanding our highways are important. They're key, especially with gas tax dollars going to both federal and state. We need to make sure we're using those dollars appropriately. But we also need to make sure we're delivering projects much quicker. We got to cut the regulations. So in this state, we've got CEQA as the highest environmental policy. Why would we go through CEQA and then have long delays to go through the national NEPA, the national policy, a second time, only to have more lawsuits and delays? We've got to streamline this so that the two, you can go through the process at once. Rather than taking 10 years on a project, we want to take less than 2, from permit to construction, and actually get people where they need to go. Also in this infrastructure package, we're dealing with expanding our ports for our exports. We're dealing with rail, a wide variety of issues, but I would say the biggest issue by far for our state is water storage. We've got to build Shasta, Temperance Flat sites. So we got to be prepared to do the authorization for Los Vaqueros, as well as all of our irrigation districts, our lakes that are going through FERC relicensing. That is the biggest part of this entire infrastructure package.
Now, there's been some roadblocks, at least at the state level, trying to get that funding for Temperance Flat and sites. What do you make of that?
Very frustrating. So when we passed the state water bond, it passed overwhelmingly. It was disappointing at the time that it was written in Sacramento that it was only $7.5 billion, and that out of that $7.5 billion for water infrastructure, for real new storage, was only $2.7 billion. But now for them to pull the rug out from under us and say that none of our projects qualify for the $2.7 billion, I think is dishonest. Which is why I'm authoring the Voter Protection Act this year to be on the November ballot. I very strongly believe that your gas tax dollars ought to go where they were promised, to fixing roads, and that when you pass a water bond, that water bond should go exactly where voters approved it. And even tobacco tax. You know, we've got a healthcare issue here in this area. We need to make sure that when you pass a tobacco tax, whether you support it or not, it's got to go where it was promised to voters. So the Voter Protection Act will help us to not only secure dollars, but will really help us to leverage dollars with the federal government when it comes to building new infrastructure.
So you're back to your Voter Protection Act. So it'll be is it going to be a federal law, or are you putting on you say you're putting on the state ballot?
It'll be on the state ballot this year, but it will guarantee that our state dollars stay where they're supposed to be, and then will allow us to leverage those dollars with the federal dollars as well. What we need as part of this infrastructure package, this national infrastructure package, is to make sure that our water bond is utilized for a match against the federal government. And then as part of this infrastructure package, we also need a water bank, if you will, an infrastructure bank for water storage. We have it for other transportation projects through TIFIA. We want one through our reclamation areas so that we can actually use our federal dollars as a bank so that we can get low interest or no interest on these loans. It'll save billions of dollars as we move forward and build Shasta or sites or Temperance Flat or a number of any other big water storage projects.
How much money are we talking about total that President Trump is planning to spend in this infrastructure bill?
The initial number was $200 billion. We want to leverage that with a lot of local and state dollars so that we can get to the $1 trillion or even more than that on a federal level. But my personal view is $200 billion is not enough. We've got to try to find new revenues that will help us to leverage that dollar amount up. I'd like to see it closer to $400 billion. I think that would help us not only in paving new roads, but we've got to build our ports. You know, you saw the Panama Canal open up last year, taking big ships, and we're going to see our ports bypassed if our ports can't handle those new big ships. And our export markets depend upon it. A lot of the exports that we see coming out of the valley need to have those deep ports so that we can do more exports here.
You are one of 535 legislators in Washington. 200 billion, that's probably not enough to go around for everybody's project. So, how do you fight to get that money in return to the valley?
Well, one of the things that's different under this infrastructure plan is it's got a rural focus. A lot of rural America has been left behind, and that's one of the challenges that we've seen here with Highway 99 and many of our arterial highways as well. So we want to see a rural focus, but again, I believe that we've got to have a much larger number focused on that. And I have aspirations to be the next chairman of the committee, and that is going very, very well. If I become chairman, that certainly helps me to continue to fight for water storage here in California.
Now, what would that mean for high-speed rail?
I've got big concerns with high-speed rail. I've mentioned that many times in the past. What started off to be a $33 billion project is now well over $100 billion, and we just saw recently the cost estimates of the first segment of this continue to skyrocket. So, I believe you got to have trust and transparency in government, and government actually needs to do what it says it was going to do. So, if we passed a $9.95 billion bond through the voters, then the voters should be able to get a $33 billion project with the money that voters approved. And if not, it needs to go back in front of the voters again, whatever the new project is. If it's well over $100 billion, I think the voters should have the right to vote on that.
All right, talking a little bit about immigration now. Supreme Court this week gives DACA a little bit of a reprieve. Does that mean the deadline, the March 5th deadline that President Trump set, that probably doesn't apply anymore? So without a deadline, what's the feeling in Washington? What's the mood in Washington to get something like that passed?
Yeah, I'm certainly concerned about it. I believe that Congress operates best when there is a deadline, and with immigration reform, there hasn't been a deadline in decades. So the March 5th deadline, I still feel is real and one that we should be focusing on to get something done immediately. This is not something I think we can afford to punt until October, which is when this new court deadline is. So we've got to get something done now. Look, these dreamers have done what their government has asked them to do. After graduating from high school side by side with our kids, they've come out of the shadows. They've passed background checks. They've gotten jobs, or they're going to school. They're giving back to our community. So if we want to have a strong economy, we need to make sure that we solve this issue with our dreamers. But it's just the right thing to do. It's the right thing to do for them. It's the right thing to do for our community. We've got to get it done.
Why is it taking so long? Is this just the Washington way?
It is certainly frustrating. People are talking about this. We've had 6 months to work on it. We've had a couple decades to work on it. Democrats had control of both houses and the presidency, and they failed to make this a priority. I think that both parties have to make it a priority today, and we're working bipartisan to come up with a solution. But so far, you saw the Senate stumble quite a bit 2 weeks ago, and now the House has been very slow to bring anything to the floor. What I'd like to see is what they call a Queen of the Hill strategy. If you're really going to have transparency in government, then bring all the proposals to the floor, and whichever one gets the most votes, that's the one that we should pass.
A lot of talk about Oakland Mayor Libby Schaaf possibly tipping off people about an ICE raid. What do you think all about that?
Look, I am against sanctuary cities, and I'm certainly against sanctuary states. I believe in the rule of law. Our sheriffs here in the Valley work very closely with all of their counterparts, both at state, local, and federal levels. So to say you're going to release a felon back into the community without alerting ICE and the federal authorities, I think is just wrong for our community. If you're committing crimes, those are the people that we don't want in our communities. And so I think we have to have a strong line stance about those that are preying on our immigrant population and really creating a unsafe environment because they are felons here in our community. So all levels of law enforcement should work together. And my big concern with sanctuary cities is if the sheriffs in some of these liberal areas, say San Francisco or Oakland, where we saw this most recent issue, if they allow these felons to go out, well, that doesn't mean that the federal law enforcement or ICE doesn't do their job anymore. That means they go out into the community, which, the house in a neighborhood may be next to a school or a hospital, and ICE still has to go do its job. And when they go into a house, if they find anybody else that's breaking the law or anybody else that's illegal, they take them too. It is the wrong way to approach immigration and keep trust in a community. And certainly, we've got to follow the rule of law.
All right, finally, tell us a little bit more about this coming up in the November ballot, your Valley Voter Protection or your State Voter Protection Act. What exactly is it going to do? And you say it's going to guarantee that when people vote on a certain issue, that that money actually gets spent on that issue.
Yeah, we've seen members of both parties actually steal the gas tax dollars, and so a lot of our money that we pay at the pump that's supposed to fix our roads ends up going to the general fund. Governor Davis recently did that with um, the transportation dollars. Governor Schwarzenegger did that with, he called it a loan or borrowing the money. And now we saw Governor Brown do the same thing with the tobacco tax. Look, if the voters pass something, then the money has to go where the voters intended it to go. And if the state legislature tries to steal it, this will prevent them from doing so in the future.
Has legislation like this or voter initiative like this been passed before? It seems like a case of deja vu here.
It's common sense here. It's not one that has been passed in California or tried in California before, but Arizona's had it since the 90s. There are other states that have passed this. Most states don't have the initiative process that we do, but when you have initiatives and you pass things by the voters, then the voters have a right to make sure that that money goes to where it was promised. And it should be a very transparent process as well.
Finally, would it apply to local referendum? Like if
Yes, it will. Yeah, you pass a local gas tax or any local tax, it will force that money to be spent where it was as well. So only a district attorney or an attorney general are the ones that can file against this in court, and it would have to. It's a change to our constitution.
Right, Congressman Jeff Denham, thank you so much for joining us here on GV Wire.
You got it. Thank you.